and welcome to Diabetes Connections in the News. I'm Stacey Sims, and these are the top diabetes stories and headlines of the past 7 days. In the News is brought to you by T1D Exchange. The T1D Exchange is a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving outcomes for the entire T1D population. Our top story this week, big news, Dexcom's G7 gets FDA approval. This device with a shorter half-hour warm-up time with the sensor and transmitter all in one piece was approved for people aged 2 and up with all types of diabetes. It was also approved as an iCGM as expected, which is good news for the automated systems the G6 currently works with. Much more to come, of course. And we've done a lot of episodes on the features and design of the G7, so I would urge you to listen to those if you haven't yet. I will link them up in these show notes, or you could just go to diabetes-connections.com and search G7 in the big search box on the upper right-hand side. Of course, we're going to follow up with a new episode with Dexcom as soon as they'll talk to me. In other news, in Illinois, the Attorney General has filed a fraud lawsuit accusing Eli Lilly, CVS Pharmacy, Novo Nordisk, and several other pharmaceutical companies of artificially inflating the cost of insulin by over 1,000% since the late 1990s. The complaint singles out Eli Lilly in particular, noting the price for a dose of its analog insulin, Humalog, rose by 1,527% between 1997 and 2018. Quote, remarkably, nothing about these medications has changed, the complaint states. Today's $350 insulin is the exact same drug defendants originally sold for $20, end quote. The suit also notes that about 13% of people in Illinois, about 1.3 million people, live with diabetes, making the pharma company's alleged monopoly scheme a public health threat. There are several other state class action suits against the insulin makers going through the courts right now. So far, none have landed more than a glancing blow. A new contender, though, might be entering the arena. Mark Cuban's Cost Plus Pharmacy put out a tweet this week asking for feedback on adding insulin to their lower cost inventory. Quote, insulin users, we are evaluating a future insulin test program. I would like your feedback. If we offered a 90-day supply of fast-acting insulin, 12 vials or 8 packs of pens for $170, including shipping, what would you think? That is the question they posed. There is a feedback form, and I will link that up in the show notes if you would like to help answer that question. People with diabetes who used glucose-lowering drugs prior to getting COVID-19 seem to have fewer COVID-19 related adverse outcomes in the hospital. The medications have already been shown, and there are some conflicting findings here, though. The medications have already been shown to have possible benefits regarding morbidity and mortality among patients with diabetes who get COVID-19. These meds include orals like metformin, as well as injectables like SGLT2 inhibitors like Jardiance and Invokana, and GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic and Trulicity. New research about opioids and diabetes. This study says people with diabetes who had surgery had a significantly increased rate of prolonged opioid use compared to people without diabetes who had surgery. 56% higher for people with type 2, more than 200% higher for those with type 1. This was a big retrospective observational study of more than 43,000 people who had operations at what they called a single diverse healthcare system from 2008 to 2019. The researchers say this shows that in a real-world setting, healthcare providers are generally not accounting for individual risk factors when prescribing post-operative opioids. Teens with type 1 who took a medication used to treat Parkinson's disease and type 2 had lower blood pressure and less stiff arteries after a month of treatment. This is a small study published in Hypertension, an American Heart Association journal. People with type 1 are at higher risk of high blood pressure, and those diagnosed as kids have even higher risk for heart disease. So researchers are interested in ways to slow down the onset of vascular disease in kids with T1D. This was a small study. The researchers say they want further research into this drug. It's called bromocriptine and its impact on vascular health, and they are planning larger trials. CVS facing a fraud charge with a lawsuit accusing them of deceptive fundraising in a campaign held for the American Diabetes Association. You've likely seen this at many checkout counters. They'll ask you to round up or make a donation. They show you where the donation will go, and you're obviously allowed to opt out or select, not to do this. The plaintiff here says that CVS agreed to give $10 million to the American Diabetes Association but they decided to use customers to raise the money. And they didn't make customers aware that this was going on, making it seem like their donations would be on top of anything coming from CVS or not making that $10 million obligation public at all. CVS, for their part, says they agreed to fundraise from customers and then turn over the donations to the ADA. And after more than 3 years of fundraising, they would make up the difference between whatever customers brought in and the $10 million they promised. CVS wants to dismiss the case. The group bringing the suit says everybody who made a donation is entitled to damages. We'll keep you posted on this one. Wearing a CGM can keep you out of the hospital, according to a new study focusing on Veterans Affairs clinics in the U.S. Wearing a CGM was associated with a lower risk for all-cause hospitalization and mortality in adults with type 1 and type 2 diabetes. This was even though the people with type 2 who received CGM were actually unhealthier than non-CGM users, according to the researchers who called the mortality reductions dramatic. During a presentation at the World Congress on Insulin Resistance, this researcher said, all of this data suggests we may need to look at these types of outcomes in a much more serious fashion. There may be some additional benefits we did not appreciate. If true, then maybe CGM use may become more like the SGLT2 inhibitors, and we'll start using them in a much more comprehensive way. End quote. Back to the news in just a moment. But first, I love talking about the T1D exchange. What I like about them is that they ask questions that matter to our community. And they don't just take the answers and put them online, for us to react to. They bring them to policymakers, to the insurers. They really use them to make change, to speed up development of new treatments and technology, to, generate evidence to support those policy or insurance changes that will help us all out. So when you go online to the T1D Exchange Registry and sign up and then answer questions, you are helping advance meaningful T1D treatment, care, and policy. I really hope you check it out. Everything, of course, is confidential. Your participation is fully voluntary. It is so easy to find. It is t1dregistry.org/Stacey. It's in the show notes as well, t1dregistry.org/STACEY. Back to the news, and we've talked about the GLP-1 receptor agonists, drugs like Wegovy and Ozempic, how its use as a weight loss drug, not just as a drug for people with type 2 diabetes, has gotten a lot of attention on social media. There have been shortages in some countries, and now Lilly, which sells tirzepatide under the name Mounjaro, is being very closely monitored by the company. In October, Lilly made changes to their discount programs for these drugs, now requiring people to say they have type 2 diabetes. Pharmacists are checking to see what the diagnosis is before people are buying this. That makes sense. You figure people who are on TikTok trying to lose weight don't need this stuff. But people with clinical obesity who are turning to the medication as one of their few options for treatment are now finding that they may be locked out. So there's more to come on this. I'll continue to follow this. Obviously, we're looking at this through the diabetes lens, but I think it's worth noting that, a lot of the headlines have talked about this as like the TikTok magic weight loss shot. There's a lot more to this story, so I'll continue to try to fill in the blanks where I can. On the podcast next week, Yale lacrosse player Bree Carasquillo was diagnosed just after her freshman year. Now she's part of Dexcom U, a new program for college athletes with type 1. We're talking to Bree, and I'll be explaining the whole name, image, likeness situation. If you haven't followed that, a lot of people have been following it closely, but if you haven't, this made Dexcom U possible. Very interesting. And last week's show was about OneDrop making a new CGM. Well, they're calling it a health sensor. And I talked to the CEO, Jeff Dachis, about that. And you can listen wherever you get your podcasts. That is in the news for this week. If you like it, please share it. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you back here soon.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.